The soundtrack to your day.
This is Jorvik Radio.
You're listening to Love in the Morning. My special guest this morning is the National Chair of the Campaign for Pubs, Paul Crossman. And before that track, we were discussing the parlous state of the pub industry at the moment. So last week, the Chancellor had a real chance to throw the pub industry a lifeline. Before we talk about the actual budget, Paul, what would you have liked from the budget in a perfect world, or even an imperfect world?
Well, yes, this budget time is always interesting. And this time, as we always do, we did write a letter to the Treasury laying out the things that we would like to see. One of which was, as I mentioned earlier, energy costs. And we really would like to see some action on energy costs for businesses. There is still nothing in place to protect businesses from, there is no cap, as I mentioned before. So we did mention that. Obviously, we did mention rising costs generally, because obviously we're in a cost of living crisis and prices are going up for everyone, including for businesses themselves. And of course, consumers have less money to spend, so it's affecting footfall in many places. So we flagged that up, obviously. We also talked about what happened to the last budget, which was an increase in employment costs. Now, this, at our pubs, we're very fortunate. We are still reasonably busy. We've got nice customers that have come with us on price increases. So we are able to be a living wage foundation employer. So we pay higher than the government's version. We pay the actual living wage. But most pubs could only dream of doing that, unfortunately, with the margins they're now trying to work on. So any costs, any sort of increase in employment costs, such as the national insurance increases that came in last budget, were very difficult for a lot of small businesses. Unfortunately, some publicans had to lay staff off or cut down staff hours and do those hours themselves as the operators, meaning, there are some publicans out there working 90, 100-hour weeks just, in their own pubs and still earning less than minimum wage themselves, just simply because of the way things are. So that was an issue. But we didn't really expect the government to be listening to that stuff, and sure enough, they didn't. We also asked for a preferential treatment of pubs and hospitality when it comes to VAT, which actually would be in line with lots of other countries where they prioritise hospitality businesses to get people out, to make the whole thing more viable and more profitable, because they can see the value of hospitality to their communities. But again, we didn't expect the government to respond to that, and sure enough, they didn't. But the one thing that we did expect them to do, because they literally promised to do this. In fact, in 2022, Labour promised to scrap the business rate system altogether and replace it with something that was fairer to high street businesses. So we at least expected them to keep their promise to actually properly reform the system and bring business rate bills down, which is what they explicitly promised in the build-up to the budget. And in the end, business rates turned out to be the worst part of the budget for us. They attempted to put something in place, and the upshot has been a total catastrophe, basically.
I mean, it was a huge shock for a lot of people because, as you say, we're expecting some kind of favourable outcome. And in the end, they estimate that maybe over 80% of pubs will end up paying more business rates. Is that the case, you reckon?
Yeah, we've run some figures. We've looked at the analysis done by other trade groups who've reached similar conclusions. Yeah, you're right. We got nearly 80%. We think it's nearly 80% of pubs facing an increase in their rateable value. Now, business rates is a slightly complicated, annoyingly complicated situation. You have what's called a rateable value, and that's reassessed every 3 years by the Valuations Office. And that is the baseline from which your business rate is calculated. So the new valuation has just gone through, and the new valuations that were set by the Valuation Office were published on budget day. So we had the budget announcement, and then publicans everywhere just rushed online to see what their new valuation was going to be. And this is where we discovered that they'd gone up almost across the board. So the measure that was announced by the Chancellor, which was a slight decrease in the rate you pay according to your valuation, was completely wiped out by the fact that the valuations had gone up by so much. And it was a total shock. This is completely not what was promised. So everyone's been absolutely up in arms. Luckily, it's made it into the media, and it was, it's been on a few front pages even. And we need to keep that there and keep the pressure on until they do something about this, because unfortunately, the effects of these changes in some cases, because there are some very strange anomalies out there, some places have seen their rateable value go up by 400 or 500%, which means their bill, you imagine a bill, it could jump in that situation by more than that, by about 500+%. And we've seen one situation, for example, where someone's bill is going to jump up from 20,000 up to nearly 100,000. Now, that's £80,000 in theory that business will have to find. And it's enough to put, well, most moderate-sized pubs out of business overnight. So what the government has done, and the fact that they were prepared to do this, is kind of a bit of a smoking gun, really. They knew this was going to be a problem because they've immediately announced a package of, as they describe it, £3.2 billion package of support in the form of transitional relief, as they call it. So it means that people won't face the whole increase on day one. It'll be phased in over the first 3 years, by which time there'll be another evaluation, of course. But the fact that they had to put that in place shows that they knew that they were doing the wrong thing and that bills were going to go up. So it's an extremely bizarre situation. We don't understand it. It's going to saddle pubs with ridiculous rateable values going forwards. And we're already higher rated than virtually any other sector out there. I think only hotels this time around were worse hit than pubs. And given that the government knows how much pubs are struggling, there's simply no excuse for them not to have carried out the actual review they were promising and give us an entirely new system. Because the problem we've got is a unique system for pubs, and it just doesn't work.
I must admit, I was looking at the global tax specialist, Ryan, and they estimate that the average bill is going to rise by about 66%. That is just not something that you can take on board, is it?
No, we've got the same figures here. We think it's actually more, it might be slightly over 70%, actually.
Wow.
I mean, in the case of the Swan, it's going up 100%. And actually, bizarrely, I mean, that sounds terrible, but I count myself lucky compared to some of the cases that we've seen. I think in theory, this would be an £11,000 increase for us over the 3 pubs every year. But the transitional relief will take care of some of that. But it does mean that going forwards, we've got a new baseline rateable value. So at the next reevaluation, we've got no idea what will happen with those unless they change the system. And that's what we're arguing, is that if you don't mind me jumping ahead slightly, I think what we're going to argue for from the Treasury here is for this reevaluation to be scrapped, completely scrapped. We'd like them to carry on with the existing valuations and the existing 40% relief that has remained in place since COVID. That was actually reduced in April as well from 75. So that was a blow. But we want to at least keep the 40% relief, which is a lifeline for thousands of pubs out there. Keep the existing valuations, just run it through for another year and come back and look at the guidance, which is deeply flawed, partly because they consulted with completely the one aspect of the industry, which is the big business side, as usual. So we'd like a whole new look at this, a much more publican, community-friendly system, which is what they've been promising for years. And we want them to actually deliver that and to maintain the status quo in the meantime, rather than imposing these new increases on businesses that just can't afford it.
And we haven't even talked about the fact that they haven't delivered on VAT, for instance, as well. I mean, this is almost saying we shouldn't be having to talk about business rates as well as all the stuff that we've already asked for.
No, that's absolutely right. And it's another case of, unfortunately, at election time, politicians seem to love pubs. They love to get behind the bar and get their hands on the pumps and look like a man of the people or a woman of the people or whatever it is. But when it comes to actually doing something to help pubs continue to serve at the hearts of their communities, genuinely help pubs, there is never anything forthcoming. And we simply can't understand it. They seem to bend over backwards to help supermarkets, who are benefiting massively from selling cheap booze, which causes far more social issues than drinking in pubs does. But I mean, that's a separate issue. But for example, this is typified by what's happened with business rates. We've seen, as you mentioned, we've seen pub RVs, rateable values, jump up by 35%. Supermarket rateable values have gone up by 2 or 3. It's unbelievable. And if you think about anyone who knows where the Swan is, we have a Sainsbury's local on the opposite corner up the street. We pay more in business rates than that Sainsbury's. And that shows you where the government's priorities appear to lie.
But it's counterintuitive because pubs employ around about 500,000 people. The greater supply chain is 1 million jobs, and total alcohol duty across the board is around about 13 billion a year. So they're shooting themselves in the foot.
I couldn't agree more, Nick. I really couldn't. We just can't get our heads around it. We're a huge employer as a sector, Particularly, we're in a huge employer of young people. We give a lot of young people their first experience at work, and it's a wonderful experience. And I personally think that everyone would benefit from working behind the pub, because it would give you an insight into, human nature, which is invaluable. But it's certainly, that what we do for local economies and the kind of central role we play in local supply chains, the knock-on effect of pubs for their neighbouring businesses. We've seen this over and over again with pub closures. You'll see a high street blighted by the fact that a thriving pub has closed down, because suddenly the footfall to the whole area drops. And this is a real phenomenon that's happened in towns and cities all across the country. And it's not, you haven't even got to be an expert to see it, because you can see the scars on high streets up and down the country from the lack of support that's given to businesses like pubs, which are so essential in combating the loneliness epidemic, so essential in providing social cohesion, so essential in combating actually growing sort of keyboard warriorism out there. This awfully kind of conflicted culture that we've got these days. Everyone would benefit from actually mixing with their neighbours in real life, and have their ideas fact checked by their peers in real life. And that's what pubs are so brilliant for. They bring people together, and you end up having a heated agreement and then actually realising you do agree. And this is what's so beautiful about pubs. And it's deeply, deeply distressing and offensive, really, to those of us that have devoted our life to this, and to realise that actually our policymakers don't share the same view, don't appear to care, don't appear to understand, and actually just seem to want to listen to people who are taking all the money out of our industry and often our country in the form of profiteering and dividends and all that kind of thing that happens in the corporate world that they listen to.
Now, there will be a lot of people listening who may now want to get involved, and a lot of licensees that may now think, hey, this campaign for pubs has got a real grip on things. So if people want to know more about you and your organisation, how can they do so?
Well, yes, please do. We do need to grow our membership. We need to get more resources. Every member that pays, it's £25 a year. So if you think about that, it's the cost of a round, basically, these days. For like a moderate round, you'll easily spend £20 to £25 over the bar. And I'm sorry about that. It's just the way it is. But if you love pubs, you'll realise that that's the truth. So if you can spare a round, join the campaign for pubs. We would be eternally grateful. We have a website, which is campaignforpubs.org.uk, and you can easily join up using the links on there. If you love pubs, if you love independent beer and you're sick of seeing the same global brands on bars, if you value local business, if you value community, that's all the things that we stand for. Our mission statement is on our website that explains exactly what we're about. And we are different to other organisations that claim to speak for pubs. We don't speak for big business. We speak for individual pubs and communities that love them and need them. So, yeah, please do go to the website, have a look. If you can join up, that would be absolutely wonderful. And yes, we are the good guys. We really are the good guys.
Absolutely. Well, I tell you what, Paul, it's been a real education for me, and I'm sure a lot of people that now know a lot more about pubs. You keep on running those excellent pubs of yours, and we'll speak to you very shortly, I'm sure.
Thank you very much, Nick. It's been lovely to talk to you.
Thanks for your time.
The soundtrack to your day.
This is Jorvik Radio.